Picture this December 20th, 1954 at 4:30 p.m. The sun already gone, a deep quiet blue pressing against your frosted window. Inside, the air smells of balsam pine, stale cigarette smoke, and the chemical heat of a warming television. That scratchy wool sweater feeling heavy on your shoulders. This wasn't just a vintage aesthetic. This was Christmas in 1954. We like to remember it as a Norman Rockwell painting, bathed in a soft Kodachrome glow. But for the families living it, the reality was sharper. It was a time of high-stakes pressure to perform, to buy, to construct a perfect domestic paradise in a world that felt increasingly fragile. Beneath the tinsel, this season was a mix of intense commercial desire and literal physical danger sitting right in your living room, and an intense, crushing commercial desire. In fact, the season didn't truly begin with the first snowfall. It began months earlier with a thud on the front porch. The arrival of the Sears Wishbook, or the Montgomery Ward catalog, was the seismic event of the autumn. We aren't talking about a flimsy pamphlet. This was a phone book-sized consumer Bible, over 500 pages thick, filled with intricate line drawings and saturated color photos of everything a post-war heart could desire. For a generation of children, this book was their internet. They would lay on the shag carpet for hours, the smell of cheap ink and gloss paper filling their noses, circling items until the pages were tattered and soft. It's hard to overstate how much distinct stuff suddenly became available in the 1950s. The manufacturing might that had built tanks for World War II was now churning out Lionel trains and Chatty Cathy dolls. A standard Lionel train set might cost you $20 or $30. That sounds cheap until you realize the average dad was bringing home maybe $75 a week. A single Christmas could easily swallow 2 weeks' worth of wages, yet the pressure to buy was relentless. The Depression was over, the war was won, and spending money was almost a patriotic duty. Once the lists were made, the real expedition began. In the 1950s, you didn't click Add to Cart. You put on your coat, your hat, and your galoshes, and you went downtown. This was the golden twilight of the Main Street department store, just before the suburban shopping malls siphoned away the life of the city center. The sensory overload of a 1950s downtown in December was staggering. It was the sound of thousands of hard-soled shoes clattering on pavement, the smell of roasted nuts from street vendors mixing with the exhaust of leaded gasoline from the heavy, steel-finned Buicks crawling through traffic. You'd push through the revolving doors of a store like Woolworth's or Macy's, and the heat would hit you. Radiator heat, dry and stifling, carrying the scent of cheap perfume and wet wool coats. The windows were the main attraction. Animated mechanical displays that jerked and twitched with early electric motors, mesmerizing crowds 3 deep on the sidewalk. Inside, it was a contact sport. There were no digital inventory checks. If you wanted that specific Hopalong Cassidy holster set, you had to physically find it on a shelf before the lady in the fur-collared coat next to you grabbed it. But once the loot was secured, the focus shifted to the centerpiece of the home, the tree. Today, we worry about our LEDs being too bright. In the 1950s, the Christmas tree was essentially a beautiful glowing fire hazard. You went to a lot, picked out a real Scotch pine, strapped it to the roof of the station wagon, and dragged it inside where it would slowly dry out for 2 weeks next to the fireplace. Then came the lights. If you were lucky, you had the Noma bubble lights. These were the height of mid-century technology, glass tubes filled with a chemical called methylene chloride that boiled at a low temperature. When the bulb heated up, the liquid bubbled. They were mesmerizing to look at, casting a rhythmic, hypnotic shadow on the walls. They also got incredibly hot. You had to clip them perfectly upright, or the plastic base would melt. If one broke, the chemical inside was poisonous. Parents didn't read warning labels, they just told you not to touch them. The rest of the tree was draped in icicles, long silver strands of tinsel. This wasn't the plastic mylar stuff we use today. This was lead foil. It was heavy, it hung straight down, and it felt cold and metallic to the touch. Families would spend hours draping thousands of individual strands over the branches. It looked like liquid silver in the dim light. It was also, of course, lead, but nobody thought twice about the toxicity. We just knew it shimmered like magic. To finish the look, you might flock the tree with artificial snow. You could buy kits that hooked up to your vacuum cleaner exhaust to spray white pulp all over the branches, or you could buy cans of spray snow. Many of these flocking mixtures contained asbestos fibers to make them fire retardant. So there you sat, surrounded by lead tinsel, boiling chemical lights, asbestos snow, and fragile glass ornaments made by shiny Brete that would shatter into microscopic shards if you looked at them wrong. Yet, when you turned off the overhead lamps and plugged in that single cord, the danger vanished. The room glowed in technicolor reds, greens, and ambers. The heat from the bulbs released the scent of the drying pine needles. It was a silent analog magic. The house was quiet. No notifications, no 24-hour news cycle, just the hiss of the radiator and the bubbling of the lights. It felt safe, enclosed, and permanent. But as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas morning, the quiet reverence would be shattered by the absolute chaos of the mid-century American ID unleashed. The sun hadn't even breached the horizon when the silence broke. In 1955, Christmas morning didn't start with a gentle nudge. It started with a stampede. The house was freezing. Insulation wasn't what it is today, and the furnace had been dialed down for the night, so you could see your breath in the hallway as you raced toward the living room. The floorboards were ice cold against bare feet, a sharp shock that woke you up faster than any alarm clock. When you rounded the corner, the tree was dark, stripped of its nightly magic until Dad plugged it in again. But the floor beneath it was a chaotic sea of wrapping paper. There were no gift bags in the 1950s. Everything was wrapped in paper that was thicker, darker, and smelled faintly of dyes. You didn't carefully peel tape, you tore. The toys of the mid-20th century were built with a different philosophy than the plastic molding of today. This was the era of stamped steel and lithographed tin. Toys were heavy, they had sharp edges. When you picked up a dump truck or a ray gun, it felt cold and substantial. If you dropped it on your toe, it hurt. For the boys, the 1950s was the decade of the cowboy and the spaceman, sometimes wrapped in the same package. You might unwrap a pair of dual six-shooters, heavy die-cast metal replicas of what Roy Rogers used on TV. But the real sensory memory wasn't the gun, it was the ammunition. Rolls of red paper caps. You'd load them in, pull the trigger, and the room would fill with a sharp crack and the acrid burning smell of sulfur. That smell, gunpowder and paper, is the olfactory soundtrack of a 1950s Christmas morning. But the most defining toy of the era, the one that perfectly encapsulates the strange dichotomy of the decade, was the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab. This wasn't a joke. It was a science kit released in the early 50s that retailed for around $50, a staggering sum, equivalent to about $550 today. It came with a Geiger counter, a cloud chamber, and 4 jars of actual radioactive ore. While parents were building fallout shelters in the backyard because they were terrified of the bomb, they were buying their kids uranium samples to play with on the rug. It was the ultimate expression of the era's obsession with the atomic future. Optimism and existential dread packaged together in a bright red box. For the girls, the training for domestic life started immediately. The dolls, like Betsy Wetsy, weren't just for cuddling. They were complex hydraulic systems. You fed them water, and they wet themselves, requiring a diaper change. The play kitchens were made of steel. The message was subtle but omnipresent. Practice for the house you will one day run. While the kids engaged in tin and sulfur warfare, the parents were navigating their own chaos. Dad was likely prowling the perimeter with a Kodak Brownie or a heavy Argus C3 camera. Taking a photo wasn't instant. He had to load a flashbulb, a single-use glass globe filled with magnesium filament. When he snapped the picture, the bulb exploded with a pop and a blinding flash of blue-white light that left spots in your vision for 5 minutes. The bulb would be scalding hot, requiring a cool down before he could swap it for the next shot. By 2 p.m., the focus shifted to the kitchen. The 1950s Christmas dinner was a triumph of industrial food science. Freshness was out, preservation was in. This was the golden age of the can and the mold. The kitchen, likely painted in pastel pink or turquoise, was a steam-filled sauna. The menu would seem alien to a modern farm-to-table enthusiast. There was, of course, the turkey, usually roasted until it was dry as sawdust, because the fear of undercooked poultry ran deep. But the sides were the stars. The salad course was often a Jell-O mold, lime gelatin suspending shreds of cabbage, carrots, or even tuna, sometimes topped with a dollop of mayonnaise. It wiggled, it was bright neon green, and it was considered the height of sophistication. Vegetables came from cans. Green beans were gray-green and soft, cooked into casseroles with cream of mushroom soup and topped with canned fried onions. Cranberry sauce wasn't a sauce. It was a solid cylinder that retained the ridges of the can it came in, sliced into perfect crimson discs. As the family gathered around the table, the sun dipping low again, the atmosphere was one of enforced harmony. We look back at these dinners as idyllic, and often they were, but there was a rigid structure to them. Men wore ties, women wore dresses and pearls, even in their own homes. The conversation was polite. The generation gap hadn't fully torn the culture apart yet, but the pressure to be the perfect American family was a heavy weight. In the shadow of the Cold War, Maintaining a happy, prosperous home felt like a defense against the chaos of the outside world. You ate your dry turkey, you admired the radioactive toys, and you felt, for a few hours, that everything in America was exactly where it was supposed to be. When we look back at the 1950s Christmas, it's easy to get lost in the aesthetic. The bubble lights, the chrome, the naive optimism. We have gained so much since then. Our trees don't catch fire, our toys don't contain uranium, and we don't have to wait weeks for a catalog to arrive. We have traded the friction of the past for the seamless convenience of the present. But in smoothing out the edges, we may have lost the texture. We lost the collective anticipation of a world that moves slower. We lost the silence of a house with no screens, where the only entertainment was the company of family and the hum of a radiator. The 1950s Christmas was dangerous, toxic, and rigid, but it was also deeply, undeniably present in a way that is hard to find in our on-demand world.